Hey folks, I've been seeing a lot of articles online and a lot of prepper channels talking about how the U.S. is going to run out of diesel fuel in 25 days. And I wanted to give you my take on that. First of all, Fox News on Tucker Carlson actually had a segment on this where he was saying the U.S. is going to run out of diesel fuel within 25 days. We've got less than 25 days worth of fuel. There's another article. I can't think of. I think it's MSNBC off the top of my head. I'll post the links down below to all of these articles. Talking about how we've gone from assuming the world stops pumping oil and refining fuel, we would normally have 30 to 45 days worth of fuel. We're down to like 25 this year, as opposed to last year or the year before when we would have had like 30, 35, 40 or somewhere around in there. Anyway, and they're blaming this on the war in Ukraine, the pandemic, supply chain disruptions, and going from lockdowns to fully open, creating a sudden demand for fuel. Here's my take on it. This is one of those situations, I think, where Fox News is actually exaggerating slightly. We're not going to run out of fuel within 3 weeks. I do think that if the oil supply dried up, or transport of oil dried up, and refining of oil into fuels ceased, I do believe we would run out within 25 days. Because there's only about 25 days worth of actual refined fuel on hand. But again, this, like I started to say, I believe Tucker Carlson is slightly exaggerating this. On the flip side of that, the other article that I read, they clearly aren't looking at all of the factors. Because they're clearly trying to whitewash everything, smooth everything over, and make it seem like there's not an issue, when actually in reality there is. We're in this situation not just because of the pandemic and going from lockdowns and companies laying people off and people quitting and being locked down at home, to being a wide open economy almost overnight, is, according to the article. There's a lot more to it than that. Yes, you've got the pandemic that caused a lot of supply chain disruptions. People aren't wanting to work. People are not willing to work. That's just a sad fact of our sad reality today, that there are a large number of able-bodied workers that just aren't wanting to get out and work. They don't, for whatever reason. However they're making do and getting by, they're just not willing to go out and actually work a job. Whether it's because of wages or whatever, I don't know. But I've seen that firsthand at my job. We would get people in and they just wouldn't want to do anything. They would expect to sit there and get paid. And whenever they were forced to do work, they would get upset and they would leave or threaten to quit. Anyway, you've got that. You've got the war in Ukraine. Yeah, you've got all of that stuff. But sorry about that, folks. But some of the things that article didn't take into consideration is that for the past 2 years, Biden has been drawing down from our strategic petroleum reserves. We've been exporting the majority of our oil, I mean, large amounts of our oil we've been exporting to Europe, even to China. A lot of our, what was it, a million barrels or so out of our strategic reserve was sold to China recently, which makes no sense. And then Biden turns around, and rather than opening up or easing restrictions on oil production here, he turns around and he goes to Brazil and Saudi Arabia, begging them to produce more oil. This is, I don't understand the mentality here. I don't understand the thinking, and perhaps it has to do with the fact that Biden is not competent enough. He doesn't have the mental faculties to be doing the job that he's in the position to do. I mean, all it takes is just watching some of his videos to understand the fact that Biden suffers from some serious mental issues. He is obviously in a state of decline mentally. And I don't know if it's solely a product of that and his mental deficiencies or mental decline, or if it's actual policy from the left. And in my opinion, I would say it's probably a combination of the two. But it's my belief that one serious disruption in the oil production or fuel supply could send us into major shortages. I don't believe we're actually in the point of having shortages at the moment, but we're like right on the edge of going over that cliff. Our reserve is being depleted on a daily basis. Nothing is going back in, at least to my knowledge. And if it is going back in, it's going back in at substantially higher prices than it could. The other subject of this video that I wanted to talk about, and it will tie into this a little bit, is that the war in Ukraine. I normally don't talk a lot about Ukraine, but it's been announced that U.S. troops are actually on the ground in Ukraine. Now, they're specifying that these aren't combat troops. They're not on the front lines or anything. They're not in any form of combat, but they're in there to assess and check on the weapons supplies that have been given to Ukraine by the U.S. and NATO, because supposedly some of the weapons being sent over there are appearing in places outside of Ukraine. I think that's just a cover story. Personally, I think that's just a cover story. I think that we're getting ready to send troops in, because for the first time since 1940 or the 1940s, the 101st Airborne is currently in Europe, I believe in Poland right now, performing exercises and drills, war games, simulating combat with Russian troops, training against equipment that the Russians would have on the ground there. So for the first time since World War II, the 101st Airborne is over there simulating combat just over the border from Ukraine. So it wouldn't take nothing for them to be deployed within Ukraine. Add to that, you've got North Korea and South Korea firing warning shots and now launching missiles towards each other. Air raid sirens have just went off. I read an article where air raid sirens in South Korea went off due to a North Korean missile launch. So here's where I'm going with that. If we end up going into combat with North Korea, with Russia and Ukraine, or even with China and because of Thailand or Taiwan, going into a war, we would have to supply fuel for all of the ships, all of the equipment that would be involved. And that's going to take away from what fuel reserves and fuel supplies we have here in the mainland in the United States. So going to war would tap into an already short supply, an already strained supply system. And I believe then that we could very possibly see fuel rationing. Now, I don't know what's going to happen in Ukraine or what's going to happen with China. There's a lot that we don't know. It's impossible for anybody here in the United States, unless you're in the chain of command in the military or in the government, it's damn near impossible for us to know exactly what's going on, because a lot of that information is going to be considered extremely confidential, critical, and top secret. A lot of what's being put out might not be accurate. It could be misinformation being spread by our government to cover what they're actually doing. And anything sent out by China or Russia is questionable at best, because they're not going to tell you exactly what they're going to do and when they're going to do it, because then you'll be ready for it. So it's still my belief we're in what I would consider a cold World War III. It's a proxy war, as some have called it, where we're fighting Russia through Ukraine. But that being said, the fact that they've sent troops in, even if they're only there supposedly to check on weapons, that have been sent there or to aid in defense. What happens if some of the facilities and supply depots that are being targeted by Russia, what happens if U.S. troops are there examining the weapon supplies and they get killed in the attack? Well, I would guarantee you that would probably be a certain guarantee that we would end up sending in combat troops. In my opinion, it's a bad idea to have anybody over there right now. But it seems no matter what happens, it almost seems like the United States is doing everything it can to be pulled into a world war. It almost seems like Biden and his administration are doing everything they can to start a war with Russia and a war with China. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there that hated Trump, but if you look back at it, we were further away from being involved in a war then than we are now. In fact, the left constantly screamed about how Trump was going to lead us into World War III. But he brokered peace deals over in the Middle East. But if you look at what Biden and the left have done, we are closer now to World War III than we've ever been, than we ever were under Trump. So I believe we will be going into an actual kinetic war with Russia and China. And it's not going to be a proxy war through Ukraine like it has been. I believe it will, at some point, be troops on the ground, U.S. troops on the ground, inside Ukraine fighting against Russian soldiers. And I also believe, if things continue the way they are, that we will go into direct conflict with China over Taiwan. That being said, and that's my belief. I don't know when it's going to happen, but I do believe it will happen. And I believe the conflict with Russia will happen first. And once China sees Russia and the U.S. at full-blown conflict, I believe they'll take that as their cue to make a move on Taiwan. So, if that happens, it's my belief you'll see fuel prices skyrocket, fuel supplies dwindle, and possibly even rationing of fuel. So what I would strongly suggest is you start building up a supply of fuel. Now, fuel is one of those things that is extremely difficult to store long term. It can be done, but it's difficult. And not to mention it's hazardous too. It's dangerous. So you've got to be very careful. But one of the best ways I've ever heard of doing it, I heard of from Jack Spirko at the Survival Podcast. He described getting 12 5-gallon gas cans and numbering them 1 through 12. And then you go fill up one. Add some Stable into it if you want. Adding Stable or other fuel stabilizers will help store long term. Gas would normally only be good enough to use in a vehicle for about 6 months to a year. Stable would actually help it. A stabilizer would actually make that a little bit longer. I'm sorry, folks. My mind's all over the place at the moment. A fuel stabilizer would make the fuel storable for a lot longer than just the 6 months. Now, you're not going to be able to store it for 5 or 20 years. 5, 10, 15, 20 years. You're not going to be able to do that. But you can build up a supply. And what Jack Spirko was talking about was rotating the supply using 12 gas cans. You fill, just say you have one month, you fill up one. Then at the end of that month, say the next month, you would take that first can, dump it in your truck, you would fill it up, and you go fill up a second one. And you would, the next month after that, you would dump that some of that fuel into your truck, refill your cans with fresh fuel, and you would do that over and over, rotating the fuel so that the gas in the can would be used every month. And you keep building up to it till you've got 12 months supply, or 12 cans, I should say. It wouldn't be 12 months, it would be 12 cans. And essentially, is this, when you get to 12, you take that number one can, before you go get gas, take that number one can, pour that in your gas tank. Then when you go get gas, take that can with you, fill that can up, and then top off your truck. And then The next time you go get gas, you take the number 2 can, pour that in your gas tank, put fresh fuel in that can, top off your vehicle. So you would just keep doing that, and by doing that, you're constantly rotating your fuel, and you would never have fuel in there more than 6 months old, if you do it right. And adding Sta-Bil or some other fuel stabilizer could help stabilize that fuel so it would store for longer than just 6 months. Anytime gas dips down lower than it usually is, like right now, our gas around here has been like $3.29 a gallon, $3.19 to $3.29 a gallon. Recently, though, it dropped down to $3.10. At times when it drops down like that, that's when I would go add fuel. I'd get a can and fill it up. Don't buy it when it's really high. That's the wrong time to be buying it. You may not have a choice, I understand that, but if you can, buy it when the price is down. You'll probably won't ever see it at the $1.89 to $2.19 that it was before Biden went into office. But if you pick your moments and fill up when you only when you have to, or fill up your cans only when you have to, and try to fill up your tank when the gas prices are on the low side. They've been going up and down here lately, so like they say in investing, buy the dips. Whenever it goes down, buy a little bit of gas, put back. Especially this is especially true if you have a generator that you're gonna use as a backup for power during a power outage. You're gonna need fuel for that generator. You're gonna need fuel for your vehicle. You're gonna need fuel for chainsaws, things like that. So this is just a simple way of, and I know I haven't explained it really great, but this is a simple way of storing fuel, and by doing it this way, you're constantly rotating it so it doesn't go bad, it doesn't get a bunch of water in it, and you have some on hand. Now, you're not going to have an indefinite supply on hand. 12 cans, 5 gallons each, you know, you're looking at 60 gallons. That could be, for my truck, that's about 3 tanks, 2.5 to 3 tanks. But if you do this, constantly rotating it, never let your vehicle get below half a tank, it'll help carry you through some blackouts, power outages, and it'll give you the flexibility to be able to do certain things a little bit longer if they do start rationing fuel. Anyway, that's all I've got. That's all I wanted to talk about. The links to the articles I mentioned will be down below. I appreciate you guys watching. Like, share, subscribe if you haven't, as always. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate all the likes, all the comments, all the subscriptions. I appreciate it all, folks. I really do. And until next time, folks, just keep prepping, stay safe, take care of yourselves, and until then, I'll catch you later.